Ethiopia's foreign minister has defended the state of emergency declared last week, even as demonstrators staged boycotts in the north of the country. Dr. Wakde Beyehu met with foreign diplomats in the capital Addis Ababa, telling them the move was not necessary to restore calm in the country following months of violent protests, which he said had threatened the country's stability and economy. But his meeting with now let's get more on this with Larry Baruwa, who is a human rights activist. He joins us from our Abuja studio. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Well, we'll be talking about the funding for the UN Refugee Agency work in Uganda, which is currently under threat. But what do you make of this?
Well, it's very disheartening and very disappointing indeed. But this trend has actually been happening for some time. But we are all sad, and this has happened also in Nigeria, and we've had to deal with this across most countries where you have conflict-related issues, displacement. You always have officials trying to, play fast one on the displaced people. It's very sad indeed.
Well, now, we understand that investigations are underway by both the Ugandan government, the UN, and the European Union. Do you think that the Ugandan government is complacent?
Well, about complacency, I wouldn't think so. But even in countries with the most hostile laws towards corruption, you still find officials who are corrupt. And I'm talking here about an Asian giant, a giant in the Asian continent. But when you look across this region, when you have cases like this, you see that you can't divorce this from issues that had to do with weak monitoring mechanism. You also have issues that borders on very poor governance system in those countries, and also maybe lack of strong commitment to accountability is also an issue in those countries. Maybe not totally complacency, but another very key issue also is the fact that governments in most cases usually appoint politicians or political allies into offices that monitor, that supervises humanitarian crises, and it's one of the problems we have. Even in the main agency in Nigeria, the lead person in the agency responsible for complex emergencies in Nigeria is also a politician. He was the gubernatorial candidate in the last election. Those are issues. When you put politicians, people especially without pedigree in the humanitarian space or without experience in relief work, you are going to have this kind of crisis, and they will keep reoccurring. And most of the time also you find lack of commitment because governments are usually caught in a double bind. They want to keep the donors happy, so every scandal that breaks puts them in a problem, so they try to suppress it.
Now, Dr. Larry Baruwa, please just hold your thoughts there. Let's see this report coming from Uganda, actually, where the UNHCR says that it will cut off aid if this issue is not looked into.
Multiple investigations are underway by the Ugandan government, the UN, and the European Union to verify claims that officials had inflated refugee numbers in the country in order to steal aid. Other accusations include bribery and trafficking of refugee girls.
We are definitely offended by these acts. We feel really betrayed by those who are perpetuating, those who are doing this to most vulnerable population who have come hungry, emancipated. You see them, you should have pity. And whatever is brought for them, whoever is diverting them for their personal needs, these are criminals who are heartless. We cannot accept it.
An estimated 1.4 million refugees are in the country, with over 1 million of those from South Sudan, where a 4-year-old civil war has left death and displacement in its wake. About 400,000 refugees have come to Uganda from Burundi and the Democratic Republic of Congo.
People need to see the government of Uganda taking swift action to investigate, to ensure the restitution of any lost funds, to prosecute perpetrators, and to demonstrate its commitment to accountability and transparency. Anything less than such actions will breach the trust bestowed on Uganda by the international community through its generous donations from hardworking taxpayers who feel nonetheless compelled to help.
Uganda has been widely praised for opening its borders, offering refugees plots of land for cultivation and allowing them free movement and employment rights. In recent weeks, the rate of daily arrivals from eastern Congo has spiked on the back of deadly intercommunal and ethnic violence.
Now let's continue the conversation with Mr. Bariwa from our Abuja studio, still talking about the issue in Uganda. Now, we saw in that report that the UN Refugee Agency, that's the UNHCR, is saying that it will cut off aid if the numbers of the refugees are not verified. What risk does this pose to the refugees who desperately need the aid?
It would be most unfortunate if aid is cut off totally from these refugees. I think it will be high-handed also, but by and large, you also see that the crisis, the allegations of fraud and diversion in Uganda is also something to take note of. And I have a strong feeling, I have a strong hunch that by the time verification is done, most of those numbers will reduce drastically. Usually in cases of conflict, especially on the continent of Africa, numbers are usually padded by officials. And as soon as biometric systems introduced, as soon as proper monitoring and evaluation, and even feedback mechanism is instilled in the camps, you will have better outputs. But for the UNHCR, for the US government and donor agencies threatening to cut off aid, it will be unfortunate, and I don't think it will be the proper way to go. Let's just sift out all the bad eggs and weed them out of the system and ensure that the governance system in Uganda is strengthened.
Now, back home here in Nigeria, a similar incident happened in the IDP camps in the northeast where government agencies were accused of diverting supplies. Why do we find this happening?
Well, I don't have the answers to that, and I don't think anybody have the perfect answers to that. But the issue also still boils down to lack of the weak systems in the states, weak systems in the camp. And even where there are systems, you find that the lack of will to follow through with these systems. And you find intimidations of even officials of the UN agencies. You find intimidations of even the local officials by political stakeholders. And those are issues that interfere with this in its entirety. But as long as we keep having politicians controlling the systems, especially that has to do with displacement and humanitarian emergencies, we are going to keep having these issues. And you must also understand that there is extreme poverty in most of these places, and you find you place a man who hasn't had food in charge of distributing food to displaced people. He will also think of his own family. But where the proper systems are in place to check everybody in and out and no compromises is allowed, this will work for the good of everybody involved.
Human rights activist Mr. Olatunji Olariwaju Bariwa, thanks for joining us on Network Africa. Well, still to come on the program, Zimbabwe's longtime leader Robert Mugabe turns 94 today. Do join us.